Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Jess.
Hello, world.
And Alex.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening to the Uncomfortable podcast.
I thought you were going to say like call letters or something like
Oh.
UNPD or UNC
CCC.
COMCMFY. Uncomfy.
I will say that.
I don't know. I can't think of any good call letters.
Speaking of call letters,
Yeah.
Tell us.
next week, my community group, we participate in this thing called the Market to Market. Mm-hmm. And our team name
yes.
is CCCU at the finish line. How about that? Yeah, well, we're going to wear some Christ Community Church gear and, see what we can do to represent Jesus and community.
Did you spell it all out like SEESEESEE?
No, it's literally letter CCCU at the finish line.
Okay. All right. Well, I hope you guys win.
I don't think we're going to win, but
no, because I want there to be headlines about CCCU at the finish line in the newspaper.
There's it's not really a race, but it's placing. It's like from basically Ralston to the Haymarket, but it's a relay. And so it's fun, and I was just proud of that name. So
it's from where again? Say that again.
From Ralston to
the Haymarket.
The Haymarket in Lincoln.
Oh, in Lincoln. Wow.
Yeah.
That's all. Oh, yeah. You've done this before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is like an annual thing. For
last year we did take off due to our captain and his wife having our captain and her husband. I want to get that right. Our captain is definitely Tara having a child.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, thank you for that update. Very valuable.
We're back, just like in
a lot of details about
a high value update for our listeners.
I know.
Today, I hope they're
Eric. I feel like we need to step it up.
Marking their calendars. Are you running any marathons that you'd like to update everyone on?
Really.
Nor am I.
Doing any row competitions? You've done some row competitions.
Not doing anything in the next.
I mentioned on a previous podcast that I wasn't allowed to flush toilet paper because of my sewage line.
Oh, is there an update?
I can flush toilet paper now. So
round of applause.
That's pretty exciting for me. So just want to give people an update.
Now, at this point, does it after you've had to go through something like that? Are you as passionate about which way the toilet paper is directionally, or are you
the
less?
Roll,
you're like, I don't care as long as I can flush it now.
Mullet
Alex,
or bangs?
that's ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm still pro bangs.
Yes, Alex, don't even try to tear this up because
maybe I'm even more
feisty.
because I'm cherishing this opportunity to freely flush the toilet paper, and I want it to be presented well.
So you're still going against
Obviously,
the vote by all of our listeners.
Undecided.
Okay. Well, we do remember the way our listeners voted. So.
How did they vote? What are you saying?
They sided with me.
No, they did not.
Matter.
Alex,
yes.
they did not. Absolutely not.
You logged in from every one of your Finsta accounts and
Yes.
voted on that, so I don't think it counts.
I think you.
I've got the receipts.
Way.
Got the receipts, as Deion Sanders would
I remember
say.
somebody posted the patent on this. We're not going to go because it's going to get ugly. Let's just move on.
Yeah, we don't want to argue. Do we have any voicemails? Maybe they can
Alex.
voicemail.
Bring some.
Who brought up the toilet paper? You did.
Yeah.
I did,
Eric brought it
technically.
up.
Sewage line thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Okay.
Here it is.
Hey guys, this is Marie again. I just wanted to ask if you guys have a favorite podcast episode, specifically from the Uncomfortable podcast. Whether it was something that you guys really had fun recording, or a special guest that you had that you loved being able to talk to, or just content that you thought was really enlightening. Which podcast episode would be your favorite? Thanks. Bye.
I'm going to assume, Alex, you've had a lot of time to think about this, so I'm going to let you go first.
I really haven't. I was going to think, like, this feels like I'm going to have to toe the line of coach speak when they ask, like, hey, what players are you proud of? And you're like, I can't mention any because then I'm going to forget one, you know? And I feel like if I mention a guest, then I'm going to,
I'm going to say my favorite for you was Mike Polenta. Planeta. No, that's how
my
you say
guy
it.
Mike from The Bachelor.
Yeah.
Oh man,
I felt like that was a really starstruck special moment for you. That was episode 166.
That was quite the
if people
celebrity.
are wanting to look
yeah,
back.
that was fun. And the Bachelorette or Bachelor, one of them, it's like the golden one where it's like people that are a little older.
Gary's
right
going to be
now.
the new Golden Bachelor.
Isn't he like older than
Yeah,
like the
he's
typical?
71.
Yeah, so those that are interested in that show right now, it was a fun episode. Mm-hmm. Definitely different, and he, Mike he shared some behind the scenes of what happens on that show. That was very interesting. So, oh man.
Jess, do you have a favorite that you can think of right off the top?
I think one of my favorites, because I think I've been on the podcast about 3 years, and one that always stands out to me is my first one-on-one interview I ever did. I think it was in 2020, maybe going into 2021, with Lisa Ashton about Athlete A and the Netflix documentary around that, and Larry Nassar, and just
because she had a very close connection with all of that. So
those are also moments where I remember like how precious it is at any guest we have on, just the holiness of their story and the gift that we have of just sitting across from people as they're sharing different details about themselves and what they've learned, and allowing us to learn from them. And so I think she kind of started that out for me. And I feel like every guest, even down to last week when Jarrett was on, it's like these people are trusting us with their stories and just being open. Maybe we don't agree with everything or we've experienced everything that they say, but just the openness that our guests give us to, and all of us that are listening to just receive and to learn different things and see different sides of Jesus those are my favorites. So I love when we have guests on.
Yeah.
I like the three of us too, but
yeah. I will say, you're saying that, Jess, brought to my mind, like we did a series a couple summers ago on just human sexuality and had a few different guests on. And for me, it was probably the ones I had to do the most prep work on, mostly, making sure, having conversations with our elders, making sure, as we're having these conversations with people that don't always maybe believe the exact same things that we believe, but inviting them to be in proximity to us, to hear their stories and all of that kind of stuff, I think is important. And it's been a value that I've always desired, and I think tried to help us have on this podcast, which you guys as well. And so that was a conversation with one of my siblings who is transgender, episode 92. We had a conversation with someone titled Living as a Gay Christian. So someone that would say that they identify as gay, attracted to men, but they're navigating what that means to not act on just their attraction. And then there was also, between those two, episode 91, parenting an LGBTQ plus IA teen. And so a gal named Holly, one of my dear friends that I worked at a church with, just having that conversation and about how do you approach that, when you have a teenager that comes to you and shares their identity struggles and the things that they're struggling with. How do you have those conversations? So I was just grateful for each of their authentic stories. Have had a lot of feedback just around, a lot of people that might have thought differently from that, but it was an opportunity to bring people in proximity to, I think, stories and maybe build more empathy muscles. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm thinking through it, and there's so many that it's been a while. 2019 was when we started this, and there's so many episodes. We're getting close to 200. I'll just start by saying I always shout out to Carl Pegenkemper. I always enjoy having Carl on. He's Dr. Carl Pegenkemper. Excuse me. I think he's just, it's always fun to just have a conversation with someone like him who has just a very intelligent way of critically thinking about the world and looking at those issues, and that's always really fun. There's a great Christmas episode during the pandemic that was just a fun one where former staff Joshua Lilly wrote us a song and performed it, which that's really great. And there's other ones about that are about just kind of topics that come up, like the rise of the ums, I think was a great episode. And then just other weaponized incompetence was such an interesting thing to talk about that I don't think a lot of people had heard of or realized what it was, or that there was a label for that. I don't know. Sometimes we have those smaller, kind of more nuanced episodes, and I think those are some of my favorites, just to get to hash out topics like that. And sometimes we rarely come to a resolution on those episodes, and that might be kind of like today's episode, honestly. But I think those are definitely some of my favorites.
And it's easy to forget, the conversations that we've had. Like yesterday, we even had in our staff development organization called Rise, who does a lot of prison ministry in the city, especially in our state. And Jeremy Bowman, who's from this church, and he started this ministry, and a guy named Aaron, who at the time when we interviewed him was not even on staff at Rise, and now he's on staff. And it was cool to hear God doing a lot of work, and we got to hear their stories. And sometimes it's fun to say, hey, like we know them and we know those stories, and as they're being introduced to people in proximity, to be able to share those and say, hey, you want more of Aaron's story? I was able to share that with our staff. And so it's crazy how much we've covered on here.
Well, it's honestly a privilege to be in this environment at a church where we've kind of built this trust to talk about topics that are a lot of times trending on the cutting edge of what's happening in culture. And I think that's something I probably take for granted sometimes, but people who do listen to the podcast regularly, I hope you feel like, okay, I kind of have a leg up on what's happening in society, and maybe I may not have the answers to it always from an episode, but I at least feel like maybe you feel a little more educated, or it at least spurs some interest where you can go and educate yourself more on these topics, and not because I think the thing that, like right now we're going through this Unoffendable series at the church, and I think a lot of times one of the primary reasons people get offended is lack of understanding or lack of information, and they get confronted with a new thing, and they either get scared or confused, and the immediate reaction is to lash out at it. And I think podcasts like this, where maybe we always don't have a concrete answer for you, but at least we are talking about it and we're exploring the nuance of the subject, is just invaluable. So anyways, I feel like I didn't give a good answer because I didn't just give one. I just listed a bunch. So sorry.
I think that's what it is, though. That's the nature of what we're doing. We're interacting with people, and I think it's hard to pick just one because we have lots of experiences regularly with people that are willing to be vulnerable, and that's an amazing thing. So
Episode 101 with Phil Vischer was very fun.
All of them are
my favorite. So I'll just put that one out there because
I'm curious what other people's.
We talked about butt news of the butt, and that was
and you
that was
like
fun.
to talk to tomatoes and squashes make you smile.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there was 101.
But what are other people's
favorite
I'd love
episodes?
To hear. I'm curious about that too because we've done.
Love to hear yours. All right. Well, thank you, caller, for leaving us that voicemail, and maybe we gave someone out there some homework if they're new to the podcast. Today, though, on this episode, coming up shortly, stay tuned for our conversation about texting, and is it potentially ruining some of our relationships or making them stronger? To find out, stay tuned. All right, I have a question for you. Is texting ruining our relationships? We text a lot because we're all kind of in different lanes, and we got to come together for this podcast, and we text each other. Is it ruining our relationship? Only when I get a lot of them from you guys, and then I feel stressed out because I don't know how to respond, and then I just don't respond.
There's certainly complexity to text messaging, so it'll be interesting.
Because you have to type all the letters, and now there's dictation, so you can just say it, and then it misinterprets you a lot.
You've got cross-platforms, you've got other things like
blue
emojis,
bubbles, green bubbles
that have been added to it. Punctuation. I mean, really, when you think about it, there can be
punctuation. It's tough.
A lot.
I like the way you said that, like it's a new thing, like punctuation's a new technology.
Like for some people, if you add punctuation, it's like.
Yeah, how many exclamation points is that?
Or there's obviously
Alex
text phrases, mad. LOL.
3 exclamations.
I think it was Mark Twain who said if you had to use an exclamation mark or an exclamation point, it wasn't worth writing in the first place. And something I probably butchered that quote, but it's very similar to that. He kind of said it's a useless thing because you should be writing more compelling. But in today's culture, I feel like if I don't use it, people think I'm angry with them or something, like I need
if you're just like, period.
If I'm like, hi, Jess, and if I don't put an exclamation point, you might think, oh, this is a serious conversation. Eric's
Right,
mad.
because you're texting and I'm thinking about your voice in a certain tone that you could be using.
Because I would never use exclamation points in writing anything. And then, text communication has made me, even social media communication, I way overuse it. And I feel bad about it. Just had to get that out there. Air that grievance.
I also think if we're using like our texting as like our first example, we are pretty businessy when we're texting. Like sometimes maybe we'll send like a funny meme or something about an episode.
Yeah.
But usually we're using texting between us to.
Are we talking about this week? Or are we going to talk about that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And before we get too far, I just need to give a special shout out to my all caps people.
Are those still existing?
Is that you?
Caps people. I know some all caps people. One of my uncles is definitely an all caps person.
The thing is, you have to go in there and turn that. Like you have to activate that.
Yeah, you could. He just must double tap it.
Or if maybe is there an Android thing where you can just default it to always cap? Maybe I don't know.
He's a blue bubble guy, so
okay. That is interesting. A choice. I like
I used to have a boss that wrote in all caps and wrote the email in the body of the email and then copied it into the subject line in all caps. And it was like, even you bringing it up, I'm like, whew.
It feels stressful.
Wave of.
I mean, I don't think it was always interpreted as screaming, but I mean, early on, like even in the late 90s with AOL, when someone types in all caps, you assume they were yelling. Like that was, I mean, that's been around for over 20 years.
People probably still assume that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, undoubtedly, it is, the way of life. I mean, it's one of the primary, I think, ways to communicate in our world, and it's something we're going to have to continue to navigate. I think even with our kids continue to navigate and more generations, and it's going to get probably more complex rather than less complex. It keeps evolving. A recent Pew study just talked about, people using their smartphones. It said 33% of adults, but 33% of adults as a whole, but 77% of 18 to 22-year-olds prefer text over all other forms of communication. So in person or not. A third of adults, and I thought this was kind of low, but a third of adults prefer text to phone calls. Text is the most used form of communication.
Age demographic on that?
Yeah, I didn't see it.
Huh.
But text is the most used form of communication for adults age 50. Age 50 and under. So 50 and under, it's the most used form of communication. And Americans send 5 times as many texts compared with phone calls each day, which I also thought was a little
stupid
low.
statistic. I'm sorry. That's just a dumb statistic.
Go deeper.
5 times, like
I'm just saying, like, of course they do. It's a text. Like,
well, 5 times it seems super low.
If I were to break down my phone conversation with you into text messages, that would be like 300 text messages because we're each saying something back and forth to each other. So I not to insult the Pew Research Center, but to me, when I read that, my gut reaction was like, that's silly. That seems like an obvious stat. But anyways, sorry to my Pew friends out there. I think it's interesting because I think language when we communicate through text is always going to be a challenge, even in email. So, I mean, I don't think it's limited to text messages. And I've found that when I write emails to people, I tend to be much more formal and I'll try to use as few words as possible and but also just get to the point. And I don't really use pleasantries. Like I don't say, I kindly would like you to consider, I don't typically do that, but I find that gets interpreted as you're angry or you're upset or you're, I don't know. Have you had that experience? Because I think that's, for me, it's happened a lot, and I've had to learn to try to soften the tone of my emails and text messages to a certain extent. Because I don't think people react well. But maybe you guys never have that problem. I think that's, when we're talking about text messages, we're talking about at the core, why is it ruining relationships?
Yeah.
And a lot of that is, I think, understanding what someone is saying and what they're trying to communicate to you.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I've had that. And you have to learn, I feel like, in just like other forms of communication, how others receive that. There's certain people I'm like, okay, they're maybe a little more prone to direct communication, or there's people that just want the facts. And so I'm like, all right, I'm gonna cut all the fluff in an email because they're not even gonna read it anyway. And there's people that, like, if I just give them the facts, I know from experience, like, they're gonna feel it differently. And so I'm like, I need to maybe have some more of the relational language in there, which feels more flowery and all that. But like, so I don't know. I know what you're saying there, and
maybe that's just something you learn in relationally. I don't know. It's tough because it's probably a lot of times I'll communicate with people the way I would want to be communicated with, because I would much rather have an email with 3 bullet points than 3 paragraphs.
Yeah. And I even think, okay, email was there before texting.
Yeah.
So it's like maybe when you were younger, you emailed your grandma or your aunt, or like it was something fun. That has evolved into something else to me. It almost email feels more professional. I guess that's mostly what I'm using
an electronic letter.
Yeah.
An e-letter.
But it's not nearly as serious as an email. Okay. That's prayer.
Mm-hmm.
A what?
An email, when you're writing a letter to God.
Alex.
Sorry. I digress.
When you're on your knees, yes. Mm-hmm.
I digress. My apologies.
But if you had text that, we would have been even more confused.
Yeah.
See, right then we could be like, what? Email.
Yeah. We have
get it. We get it.
But so when we're talking about, we aren't talking about emails, but I do think it's kind of an evolution. Like that's part like the communication and electronic communication has evolved into,
sure.
There's message boards and things like that. And now we're at a place where we have instant communication to one another via text message, whether that's
access at all
WhatsApp
times
or even Facebook Messenger or other types of messaging apps as well. I think we could include in this conversation. But yeah, let's dive into it a little bit. Like, why do we think it's important to consider the impact of texting in something like a conflict resolution where there is a misunderstanding and I am trying to resolve that? I know for me personally, I would much rather make a phone call in that situation because I want you to hear the tone in my voice. I want you to hear that I am empathetic to your perspective on the situation, but I also want to be able to plead my case in a way that hopefully draws some empathy on your side too. So I do not like to get into text arguments. Maybe I'm old and that's why, but.
And I don't think conflict is always an argument too.
No, that's true. That's a good point.
I think, like, as I'm thinking of, okay, if I'm trying to solve a conflict, there's obviously something that's gone awry or confusing, something that needs clarified, whatever might be the middle of the conflict. And I'm with you, Eric. I think there have been times where I've been in conversation with somebody and it's like a conflict is brought up over text messaging or and it's very difficult for me to continue to pursue, like to try to resolve conflict in that way because I just don't, I'm not good at interpreting it, I'm not good at like interpreting what they're saying, like knowing the tone. I admittedly will write stories and write scripts for myself if I don't have as much of the facts as possible. And I think emotion is part of that fact. Like, and it's hard to be more empathetic. I do think like emojis and things like that help in some ways, but then in some ways they also don't help, because there's like a cry face one, and sometimes are you crying or are you laughing? I don't know.
Well, there's the laughing crying, and then there's the crying.
But not everyone uses it correctly. And so I think it is important because I do think there is a tendency for people to solve conflict this way because I think it is easier, or maybe easier than having to emotionally. It's easier to.
I think it feels easier in a quick, fast food culture that we have of get it out, maybe not thinking things all the way through.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's the rise of social anxiety. People don't want to have that it feels too intimate to hear someone's voice. It feels like there's too much of a connection happening, and that can raise a lot of anxiety. Or, I even think of how so many companies are pushing their user base to chat for customer service. And I hate that. Annoying. Like, I just don't want to, you're talking with like a robot at the beginning, and then eventually maybe you get to a real person, and then what I ultimately do is try to call. Because I do want to just talk to someone because I want to make sure they understand. Like, I need to hear in their voice that they understand what the problem is. And it just seems like you can resolve it so much more quickly. But I think even going back to the text things, I think in conflict, when there is conflict or even an argument or something like that, I know there's been times where I've sent the text, kind of put the phone down, and then when I get the notification, I don't even want to look at the response. Have you ever felt that way where you're like, I feel like I replied well, but now I'm like, did they take it the right way? Did they misunderstand what I said? And now I've got to read this and try not to, like Alex said, read into it and put my own voice on it.
Right, because then if you open it, it's been read, so then how long are you going to take to reply, which goes back to a past episode we've done of
quick
that.
Poll, who has their read receipts on in this group?
No.
You have yours off?
Off for sure.
Oh, I have mine on. Do you keep yours on?
I can tell when an Android person.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I can't tell if you guys are ignoring me or
I have
not.
mine on, and I would say more times than not, I always regret that they're on.
They saw it and they didn't. It's hard to convey emotions and context. Bottom line.
Yeah.
If you're sending something,
Yeah.
even if you're say you're in a hurry and it's a quick response, I could think, oh, well, now he's mad or she's mad. I mean, there's just so much to be interpreted when we can't see the context of what's the environment somebody's reading something in or the emotions behind something. And I don't know if we're always thinking about that when we're maybe sending something that could be starting a conflict or even a deeper discussion is hard to continue to have through texting.
And when I think, especially in adolescence, because that's a time where most people now are getting phones, I think those face-to-face emotive conversations need to be had, between parent and child, and I mean, husband, wife, I mean, everybody, anytime there's conflict. But, I think sometimes it can be, like, even for me as a parent, I don't know what I'm doing sometimes. And I'm weirdly intimidated to have conversations with my kids about, like, different things at different times, because I'm like, I don't know how they're going to respond and how, where are they intellectually? So if I'm texting, them, if there's like some kind of conflict of, you're in trouble for this or that, and we're just having this dialogue, I don't know that I'm preparing them well for interpersonal conversation and dialogue, in the future when a spouse wants to address it. We've talked about a lot about family patterns recently, right? Like if you come from a family that all their conflict was done mobily via text, and then another family, all their conflict was done in person, we don't text a conflict, like that's going to create weird expectations too. And I certainly know, and I've had some counseling conversations with families where that's kind of how conflict, begins to happen inside of a resolution.
Even generational language cues are interesting. Hopefully Christina isn't upset for me sharing this, but one time, a lot of times Dexter, our son, will be upstairs doing whatever, and we'll be leaving the house. And so sometimes it's just easier to text than to yell or something upstairs and just, hey, are you coming down, or it's time to leave, whatever. And I think in her mind, she was being playful and fun and put, dude, are you ready to go? And instantly when he saw the word dude, it was like, dude. Are you ready? Like, that's how he read it instantly. And he's like, he come down and he looked kind of disgruntled. He's like, what? You didn't even tell me we were leaving till just now. And she was, it was just like over her head. Like, what? No, I was just calling you a dude. Like, and it's such a silly example, but there is so much nuance in that. And I think that partially can be generational as well.
Yeah. Well, there's article I think we've been reading through, at least in prep for this, is like by Psychology Today, and it really dives into conflict. And they had a few examples in there, and I think that's helpful because I'm like, okay, I could see myself I've had a conversation like this with my wife, maybe not the exact same one.
I feel like this is a tame texting.
And so it's like, husband, why were you rude to my mother yesterday?
Like, why would you even start by
I could
saying
picture
that,
myself
Alex?
saying it like, why were you rude to my mother yesterday? But that tone is so up for interpretation. Why were you rude to my mother yesterday?
Yeah.
And then,
Like, you shouldn't
she
even
is
text that.
Yeah. And then,
Anyways.
wife, I was not rude. I just said it's been a long time since you visited. That was rude. My mother visited a long time after your mother visited. It seems you're always critical of my mother. She said, that's not true. I'm not critical of her. Your mother is critical of me. And why do you always take her side instead of mine? And even me reading this, I am like taking the side of
You chose a side.
You're
I
taking
chose
the
a side.
Yeah.
And I have no clue.
You could easily, let's change it.
Yeah.
hey, why were you rude to my mother yesterday?
I was not rude.
Oh, jeez,
I
Jess.
just said.
I'm scared now.
Man, we are.
It's been a long time since you visited.
Yeah.
Ding dong. See,
Yeah.
that's
Whoa.
that's the part
Did you ring a
that's like-
doorbell?
That's the part that
Someone ring a
someone's gonna
doorbell?
infer that I'm
Are we-
thinking.
are
Here we
we
go.
eating
This
a
is my
hostess
text
treat?
message.
Yes. What is happening? Man.
Yeah. Anyways, yeah, you can easily, and I think sometimes it's that inner monologue, and that we don't need to go too far down this rabbit trail, but I think the way you self-think, the way you think about yourself, the way you talk to yourself, your self-talk, I guess that's the term I'm looking for.
Your inner voice.
Your inner voice. I think the way you hear that in your own head sometimes leads to how you hear other people. So I would say personally for me, I will talk negatively to myself a lot. Like, what'd you do that for? You dummy. You're such an idiot. Why would you, and I tend to do that a lot. And so when I get a message from someone that even seems a little bit confrontational, I will tend to go that route just because I think my self-talk leans that way, because whether that's low self-esteem or whatever you want to say, it sort of trends that way. And I don't know, maybe I feel like if my head was more Disney and everything was bright and cheery in there all the time, I wouldn't read messages that way. And so I don't know. Do you guys think that plays into it at all? Or
Are you asking us to analyze you?
well, no, just in general, do you have that? Do you feel like that, like your personal outlook on the world, the way you see yourself, do you think that affects the way you read those messages from people or not? I guess in general.
I think so. And I think it's also your proximity in relationship to that person. So someone that I can maybe interpret more like how friendly they're going to be or their tone of voice, I might take that a little more personal and a little more negative.
Yeah.
Anyways, because we need that context. And so if I can't see someone's body language or tone of voice, I'm going to automatically assume that maybe from past experiences or past disagreements of that I've had with that person. But it's like it's amplified in your mind when you can't see someone's body language or hear their tone of voice.
Yeah.
I mean, period.
Yeah. I think my attitude, my current state in that moment, and my last interaction with that person drive it a lot too.
Yeah.
You know, so I think if I'm in an attitude that is fun and playful and, whatever, then I probably am more likely to read that in that way. Or if my last interaction with that person was, great, and they asked the same question versus if it was negative.
Yeah, that's true.
Like, how's your day going? Like if me and my wife had an argument beforehand, her asking that is, if I'm angry, I'm going to probably hear that in an angry tone. But if it's like, yeah, we had a great day, great morning, the kids were awesome, I'm having a great day, then I'm going to answer that. Or if I'm having a bad day and she asks that, then it might be triggering for me to be like, I don't want to tell you how my day is going. It's trash. And then if I tell you I had a bad day, then then it just spirals out of control.
It is true. All right. Well, I mean, so as we dive into this, I think there was another article from Relevant and this was pretty recent. This came out a couple days ago as of this recording, and it was talking about texting is easier, but it might be ruining your relationship. So along a similar line, and I think there's some interesting facts in here about it being more of an American problem in some ways. They say in this article that it's like 5% of the time people in other countries rely on text, where America tends to rely on text messages much, much more. And they also dive into a lot of it being an illusion of intimacy. And I thought that was kind of fascinating to me of how I think about how many people I'll text happy birthday to, or I'll text something in that vein, and how a lot of times that's probably more for me than them. And I don't always, I don't want to say that as a prescriptive thing to other people, but I'm kind of preaching to myself on this, where it's like, I will do that and hopefully it brightens that person's day. Hopefully, but it is also a way for me to maybe not have to commit to a full on conversation, like a phone call would, or meeting that person in person. And I think some of that's interesting. One thing about this article that they kept reiterating is how much people enjoy texting, and that language I didn't agree with, because I don't think I enjoy it. I don't know. I've never thought of texting as something I really enjoy. I I don't know. Maybe that's just a uniquely me thing, but I don't think, oh man, I just love texting. Like, oh, I just love it. Like that. It's usually more of it's a way to get the job done. Like I need to communicate with this person and this is the quickest way to do it without being caught into a long conversation. It's not something that I am particularly enjoying. But
I mean, I definitely enjoy it now a lot more than I did when I had to, punch the button like 6 times just to get like a letter out there.
T9.
T9, that's what it was. Yeah.
I was never good at T9. Literally, I just would have to like be the person that punched that 3 times just to get a C. I was so slow. So
yeah. I don't know. Maybe it's fun if you have like really close friends that you text all the time and you just have these really in-depth conversations via text. Maybe that's where people are like, oh, this is fun and I really enjoy it. I don't know. Would you consider just
maybe
that you...
I'm just thinking like, is enjoy the right word? Because I think for you, if we reframed it and said you prefer texting to a phone call, you would much rather be texting during the day than
typically
on a phone call. I kind of like wrestle back and forth because I think there's some conversations that can easily be had over texting, like if the 3 of us planning something. Mm-hmm. But I think if there is a conflict, is that even the right medium to be using? But I also agree. I think texting has made tons of things easier. Like I love confirming doctor's appointments just by pressing C or a Y or a 1 and it's done. Yeah. I think it makes some things more efficient and it really does take some of the load that we do carry as humans and in our days and responsibilities off because it's quick. And I think we just get used to that. And how does that flow into personal relationships? How does that flow into when I can quickly respond to a doctor's appointment? Not a huge deal. Yeah. But when I am flip-flopping that over to a relationship with someone who really loves me and cares about me and giving the same responses and the same care, that's when we need to start, I think, looking deeper on what are we using texting for? And am I avoiding a relational conversation that I need to have because texting is easier? And I think sometimes doing the right thing is more difficult and it just feels, it does. There's anxiety. There's like this social like, I don't want to have that conversation all the time or it takes more work.
It's a bigger investment.
And I think that's why it's so hard to balance all of.
Well, I think humans are just naturally that way. Sometimes when you give us a quicker path to something, like how do we get to the end, like resolve this quicker? Okay, well, I could text and then it's over and I can move on. And I think we instinctively are going to go that route more often than not.
We're in a society that wants us to multitask. If we all looked, it's like, okay, how many people have you text today? How many people have you text? I'm just curious. Like, let's just look.
Let's do a poll right now.
Let's
Live
just look.
poll.
How many people? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
I'm at 8. 8 people.
14 people have texted me today.
Do I count this one that I got that just says, Happy Hump Day, Cindy? Your dress is ready. We will have final confirmation tomorrow at 10 a.m.
We're counting it because it is something that is linking and drawing your attention.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know who.
And so
I think it's from
Cindy.
Oh, is it? Yeah, Jarrett, our guest last week.
Yeah.
I think he wanted you to know your dress was ready.
And he calls me Cindy, I guess. Okay. No, but 8 if you count this text I got to Cindy.
I got 8, but I didn't count mine from Tom's.
Oh, okay.
That's a lot of expectations that are had of us, even if it's a quick question, even if it's a deeper question. It's like, do we have the capacity for this? And sometimes,
well, and I guess I'm old enough to remember, a time before, back when we didn't have texting, but there was, like phone calls were pretty rare. People did call your house or whatever, but it was this type of an interaction where it pulled you away wasn't happening. But I do think that argument then can be made on the other end of the benefits of having the technology available to us.
Yeah,
I think that's where the balance is hard to find.
I had something very profound to say, but I forgot what I was going to say.
Oh, yeah.
So I hope
would you like us to give you a minute?
I hope you appreciated that I had something profound to say.
Okay. I believe you that you did, and I'm sure that many people are just kind of distraught at this moment that they missed out on that profound moment from you.
Thank you. Oh no, I was going to ask, do you guys have any just examples? You shared one, Eric, an example of maybe, from your wife and your son of texting, communication, and maybe it wasn't solving conflict, but it created conflict almost. Yeah. Do you have any like fun stories or, things like that where you're like, yeah, this text message kind of thread or whatever, it didn't work, or is a funny story or anything like that, Jess? Eric, either.
My husband, Ben, travels like 1 week a month. And so it's hard to keep like track of him when he's gone. He's in different people's houses, helping them, looking at their houses. And there was one time, I think it was like a month or two ago, and I can still like feel the anxiety of, I couldn't get a hold of it. I was texting him, and he normally will like call the kids to like say goodnight, and if he's doing a late appointment. So I had texted him and I'm like, hey, are you going to call the kids? No response. Like, hey, are you okay? Like, I can see where you're at on Life 360, but like, what's happening? And it was like an hour and a half, and I'm like sweating. I'm like trying to find Ben's boss because I don't have his phone number. So I'm like trying to find him on Facebook to see if he can like somehow get a hold of the customers or something, because I can't get a hold of Ben. And the whole time, Ben was just out of cell phone service. So he had texted me and said, hey, I'm going to be late. I'm not going to be able to call the kids. But I didn't get that till like he was back in cell phone service. And then he obviously gets like 50 texts from me. And then my silence is like, oh, is he not thinking about us? Like, what's happening? Like, does he not care that I think he might be, tied up in someone's basement?
Yeah.
Because your mind just goes crazy. And I think that that's a good example for me of just how I rely a lot on texting. Yeah. I didn't even try to call his phone, like thinking back on it, because I'm just like, I don't want to bother him, but.
Yeah.
Undoubtedly, we have created texpectations. I would call that.
Yeah,
that's a real pastor.
Yeah, that's a real
pastor one.
No, because really, when somebody, when you have a relationship with someone that always texts back, or there's like, then you do create this anxiety. I mean, obviously, I think even all of this conversation, these technology companies, I think, are realizing and trying to make more convenient and maybe trying to eliminate some of the conflict. I think one of those examples is just the fact that, while you're driving or all of the different moments that you can set on your phone will be able to respond to someone, or at least they know your notifications are off. And so, because I think they're realizing the undercurrent that's happening there. And I think as well as like the replies, like you in a conversation, you can get so lost. Now you can reply to an individual text in a thread, because sometimes you have like one conversation going on with the person, but there's 3 conversations happening, And so even that, I think they're realizing and trying to think, how do we make this replicate as much as we can, like holistically communication? I think they've realized maybe some of the gaps that are in there, and I think they're really trying to work to solve, some of the things that happen through those gaps. If they could figure out, when an Android user sends me a picture, that it's not like the size of my pinky nail, that would be awesome.
That'd be great.
Come on.
Or the postage stamp videos.
But then also, have you guys had multiple conversations on different platforms? Like someone's messaging you on Facebook and the same person texts you, and then there's another person replying to you on Instagram.
You are triggering me right now. You're inducing anxiety right now.
Yeah, I've had those conversations, usually with older generations, where they'll pick up from one conversation on another platform, and you're kind of confused and trying to parse what's happening in the moment.
Even now, I think operating systems are realizing that, and you're able to search like for a conversation in multiple, like you can type in maybe whatever that was from the conversation. It'll go, was that on my LinkedIn, or was that on my text message, or was that email? So even that.
Well, and you kind of hinted at group chat, and I think that's an interesting one, because a group chat can either be this great experience where several people are communicating several things at once, and it is accomplishing a task, and it's maybe even like building community to a certain extent, or helping people from all over, different geographical locations stay connected in a community. Or I feel like what probably happens more in my experience is I'm having fun in a group chat with like a few of the people, and then there's that one person in the group chat that hates it, and you kind of know, and you feel bad for them that they're hating every notification. They never respond. They never, and you're just like, oh, then I get to the point where I don't want to message in that group because I'm thinking, oh, this person's going to be annoyed if I send a message in here. I don't know. But I mean, again, it's this give and take of technology that we keep running into and we keep running up against. Like what, and I think we've been fairly negative towards it. So I would like to kind of turn the boat a little bit. Like, what are the benefits here? Do we see the good side of it? I mean, we kind of hinted at it. I mean, if I'm bouncing off the group chat thing, yes, there is a place where you can stay connected. You can find community in it. I think of like younger generations where that is kind of what they grew up on, was the only way that they communicated was through text. They didn't really know anything else. That's their sole way to communicate with friends. And that's, they can do it silently in their room without their parents eavesdropping on what they're saying. They can just text, and there's probably a sense of security with that, and that the ability to shift time as well, where you can have this conversation, you can go back and forth in the moment, but then you can leave it and just pick it up at any other time as well, is probably a benefit.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things that I think of, at least relationally for me, I think about my parents, right? They didn't have text messaging when they were raising me. And so, like the extent of their relationship or communication throughout the day was like, dad goes to work, kisses mom goodbye. If mom wants to talk to dad, she's calling his office phone, and maybe, he'll answer, but if he's not in the office, she's not. And so then mom sees dad, end of the day, how was your day, honey? All that kind of stuff. And now, that's not the reality for my wife and I. I leave, I kiss her goodbye. That's a reality. But then if something comes up during the day, she can check in or has a question, or, hey, I forgot to put this in the shopping cart. Could you grab this on the way home? I mean, so many different helpful things throughout the day that allow us to be communicating. And I think when you communicate in that kind of way, it can be a tool that enhances your intimacy and your relationship. I think of even times where maybe in the morning, or not even just my wife and I, but your last interaction with a person didn't leave you feeling good, right? And you have time to sit on it, time to, reflect, and you're like, I just can't sit on this anymore. I need to just shoot them a text and say, hey, I'm sorry. Like, I'd love to talk about this later. Can we address this a little bit later? I'm sorry. I was a jerk there, or I didn't mean, to say something that way, or maybe there was a miscommunication. I'd love to, clarify that later. And so sometimes that is a great way, I think, to use text messaging, even in the midst of conflict, to at least, let a person know that you want to walk towards resolution of conflict, and that you've realized, hey, it can be disarming. If that just sat there all day, I left for work and me and my wife, had an argument or we're in a disagreement. This does not, I keep bringing this example up like it's every day, but
you and your wife argue
every day I leave, every single day I leave, me and Aaron are just arguing. So
you know who the problem is.
Not at all. But in that kind of case, previously, like my parents' generation, it's like you leave angry, you come home walking on eggshells, you don't know what you're walking into. And that can be disarming to say, hey, I'm so sorry. And about that, I thought about it more. You were right, or whatever. And now you can walk in with like a whole new fresh perspective, ready to talk about it, and kind of with an understanding that we're working together to solve this conflict, instead of kind of walking in on eggshells, like, what am I walking into? Are they still mad at me? Am I still mad at them? And so I think in that way it can reduce anxiety.
I think words matter. And even knowing that maybe you have someone that's going through something really difficult in their life and they don't have the capacity to have a conversation, I will type out prayers and send them with like not writing it in a way to like expecting a reply. And I think that there's ways to remind people that they are loved very easily, because we have, or we're thinking of them, or like, hey, you did a great job, or like, I liked what you said in that sermon. Like, just easy ways to show encouragement and to show someone their value and remind them of their value. I I don't think it necessarily always replaces that in person, but I do think it's a tool where it can be used really effectively. So when I'm working with people at City Care, especially when I'm working with teens, I always make sure that in their support system, because one of my first things I always figure out is like, who's this person's support system? Who are they close to? And then I have them set up with at least one person that they can send an emoji between the two of them. And this emoji means, hey, I don't have the words for this, but I need encouragement. Or it's also like a way of like grounding, like, hey, I have anxiety. And then that person knows what that means. And so I think it's even a really cool tool that I've been able to help someone create more of a support system and to keep them focused and to keep them out of anxious times because they're using that. Mm-hmm. And obviously Jesus doesn't specifically say anything about texting, but he does. We can always rely on his textpectations from the Bible.
Jess trying to have her own little pastor moment right there.
Yeah, I think you've got a call, Jeff. You bringing that up just reminded me, you know, there's times after a sermon where people are kind enough to like text me like, hey, this meant a lot, or you know, something that's an example. And for me, that's the perfect place for it. Like if they called me, then I'm probably not going to answer because I'm eating lunch with my family, or like, I'm like, okay, why are you calling me? But if they just email me, I'm like, well, you have my number, like, and we have that relational thing that feels like overly formal. And so like, I think something like that is a great way to have an encouragement. Or there are times where the Lord brings someone to my heart for whatever reason. And I'm like, hey, just letting you know, like, I'm praying for you, or vice versa. That's happened for me. And it's like, well, if I called them right now, they're probably at work, and that's kind of weird. Mm-hmm. But they can read it when it comes up, and so I think that's great.
So, what are some maybe healthy boundaries to set, whether it's a relationship with your spouse or relationships with parents or friends? I think a lot of times so much goes unsaid, at least in my experience. You don't talk about it. You're not like, hey, do you like it when we text? Do you prefer a phone call? You know, I don't think to have that conversation with friends or family. I don't even think I've necessarily had that conversation with my wife directly. And, you know, they were referencing that Relevant article. I think there was some people in there who say, oh, well, my wife and I, we don't text about anything that is confrontational, or we don't, I think there was a headline recently, and I forget who it was. She's an Australian actress married to Keith Urban.
Nicole
Kidman. That's it. Why couldn't I think of her
Alex.
name? Yes. Where they said that they don't text at all because they don't want any miscommunication in their relationship, so they always call each other. And I'm like, well, that maybe doesn't work for everyone, but I do wonder, do you guys think there's practical steps that people could take? Is that something like, I think if you are in a relationship where texting maybe is the problem, where you keep having misunderstandings and it keeps leading to conflict, maybe that is a conversation you can have. Mm-hmm. Or maybe it's the opposite of that. Maybe, phone calls go on too long, or it's causing there to be tension in the relationship. And maybe you can say, hey, if you don't mind, would you text me and we can have a conversation that way? And if it needs a phone call, then we can move on. I don't know. I think it's one of those things where when technology presents itself to us as human beings, we kind of just, again, go for the easy way out, or we don't talk about it. We don't think about it. We just assume, well, this made life easier, I'm going to continue on this route. But I don't know. Do you guys have any thoughts on that? Do you have any boundaries that you have set personally?
I do. In prepping for this, I kind of like went down a list of like what would be some good boundaries. Mm-hmm. So I did come up with a couple. If you want me to share,
yeah.
One would be use the appropriate medium. So is texting the right thing to be doing? Is this a conversation? Is it an email? Is it a phone call? Think of your audience. So who am I texting? Do I know them? How are they going to receive this? Don't use all caps. That was one of the things we already talked about, but I thought of that too. And then reread. Maybe if you're writing something especially lengthy, to read and reread it. Do I need to be sending it? Don't assume. That's hard for me to do. And then I just think like using etiquette So timing, are you using all caps? Is it too long? Is it insensitive?
Yeah.
Things like that.
There's a lot
It's
more
like kind of
margin
falls
for
under
error,
that.
I think, for that kind of stuff when it comes to text messaging and people interpreting it. I'm not quite as bad as my dad, but I'm, known for, especially in my car, like using, Apple
Voice to text.
Yeah, voice to text. And she's not always accurate, or Siri is not always accurate. And so I think even amongst our group chat on the team, there's some laughable moments.
Yeah.
And things like that. And I do think that there's other technologies that are coming out that are hopefully helping, move past texting, but there's also conveniences. I brought it up a few weeks ago. Marco Polo has become like one of my favorite things to use. It can be very awkward to begin, but I've got some relationships with some friends that, like, as guys, like, texting is not easy or super efficient, kind of like what you were saying, like the comparison to text messaging and phone calls. Well, I can cover a lot more ground in a 90-second, 2-minute Marco Polo than I can in a staggered out all day long, text message. So I can have I could do a 2-minute update. My friend could give me a 2-minute update, and 6 minutes of like 3 of us in 6 minutes can know a lot more about what happened in each other's lives, be praying for each other, than like that same conversation would drag out for like 2.5 weeks probably before we got there. And so I think that's one of the things I've learned to do that's enhanced, some relational and discipleship kind of avenues for me that I've learned to appreciate and find that. And then I'll just send them a milk carton if they haven't responded.
I have no idea what that means.
Yeah, because they've gone missing.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
And I think I would also just caution that this isn't about finding an alternative just for the sake of finding an alternative. If texting is working and you have healthy relationships with texting and it keeps you connected to community or to friends or family or whatever that looks like, I don't think this is a witch hunt against text messaging. It's just something to think about, because I do think that if people are running up against certain types of conflict or certain issues with that relationally, then maybe there is something there to look at and it's something to think about. But I don't think it's, it's not innately bad.
Yeah. And I think I say this probably a lot, but always err on being proactive than reactive. So whether it's parenting, like, you're going to need to have these conversations with your kids about what are our texting expectations. How do we do conflict in marriage? Like, how are we going to approach these things? In a parent, like different generational conversations. I think it's just better to be proactive and, talk about maybe your expectations or how you're going to use a tool than both of you bringing different expectations and neither of you hitting the mark. And then that really creates more conflict than I think, than often we realize. And it's much more difficult to like de-escalate something like that once you've created a pattern than to just be proactive and have those conversations in the front end.
And like we hinted at earlier, if you are using text message as a way to avoid real life relationships with people, not that it can't be real life, but you know what I mean, to avoid maybe uncomfortable moments or emotions and things like empathy, that. I mean, at least I would say analyze that, think about it maybe. And if it's a challenge for you, take a step towards confronting that.
Yeah. I think, what does Jesus say too? I mean, the writer of Colossians says, 4:6, let your conversation always be full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. So I think about that sometimes and even when we were having this conversation, it keeps going through my mind where maybe I never would have applied that to sending a text message, but now we need to. So how can we apply, the principles and the character of Jesus into not just conversations we're having face to face, but through texting?
It's like, don't be salty, just make it taste good.
Don't be salty.
Yeah. Just put a little seasoning
Just a
on
little
there.
shake.
Yeah.
That's it. All right. Well, thanks guys for having this conversation. It's interesting. Hopefully it can lead to better relationships, strengthened communication, and just overall, healthier person, healthier overall human being. Because we are, that's what we're created to be, right? We're created to have community, to interact with one another. do that the best way that you can. If you have any questions or concerns, you can reach out to us on social media. You can hit us up, as they say. Did they say that? I don't think they say that. Sorry. IG, the Instagram and TikTok is at CCCOMA podcast, or you can leave us a voicemail at 402-885-9930, or you can always send us an email to podcast@cccomaha.org. But until next time, we'll talk to you then.